So the Labour Health Minister has been sacked after his private WhatsApps were discovered. There's a big WhatsApp group full of other Labour bigwigs in his local area in Greater Manchester. Oliver Ryan, another Labour MP, has been suspended. 11 councillors have been suspended. Gwynne's texts are probably the spiciest and have caught the most attention. For instance, he wrote, imagining he was writing to a local pensioner, telling her to fuck your bins, I'm re-elected without your vote, and I hope you croak it before the all-outs, which are the local elections. Other texts include referring to a local council leader as Colin Cumface, made racist jokes about Diane Abbott, sexist jokes about Angela Rayner, quite possibly speculately made jokes about a man with a Jewish name, said that possibly he has links to Mossad. Tom, I mean, it's not pretty, but the reaction has been a bit over the top. In fact, people have called for him to be arrested.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's been a couple of people who have reported him to the police, essentially, for hate crimes. And given how speech policing has been going in this country, I wouldn't count out him actually being convicted at some point, or at least that actually being properly investigated. I think the fundamental distinction we always have to make here is that there is an obvious difference between what anyone, including a politician who should know better, from what they say in private to what they say in public. And just because it's on WhatsApp doesn't make it any less private. I think everyone would say things in private which sometimes they not only wouldn't want to be made public, but also they probably don't really mean.
Yeah.
I mean, even some of the things that look the most discrediting, like this comment which is being presented as anti-Semitic, he's commenting on a gentleman whose first name was Marshall, and he said, oh, he sounds militaristic, and by dint of his surname, also potentially a member of Mossad. It's a kind of grim joke, but does it betray a deep-seated anti-Semitism rather than just a slightly dodgy sense of humour? It's probably the latter. And the fact that we're even finding ourselves having to kind of relitigate the contents of his particular jokes and humour suggests that we've left anything kind of reasonable and just moved towards a desire to just cancel this man at all costs. I think out of self-preservation, as much as anything else, we should avoid a standard whereby things that you might say without really thinking about it, when you assume that no one else apart from a handful of people you work with or are friends with are listening, if that becomes the means through which you can be not just cancelled but criminalised, pretty dangerous position for people to be in, particularly if they do use that app, which seems to enable this kind of knee-jerk, slightly outrage-seeking kind of posting under the assumption that it's going to remain private. But as we know, particularly if you're in your public life, it rarely ever does these days.
And look, the precedent for having people arrested, possibly jailed as well, sometimes for private WhatsApps or private Snapchats or various communications that people believed were private is quite scary, isn't it? I mean, it isn't unfeasible that Gwynne could be called before a judge at some point.
No, it's not. I mean, we've seen the precedent set in the case of the police. So we've had police officers arrested and charged and convicted for circulating racist abuse. And I know for a fact that police officers are told when they get given a phone that you have no privacy on your mobile phone because you are a public servant, and anything you put in a WhatsApp group is part of your conduct as a public official, believe it or not. I think, I remember speaking on this podcast when we were talking about the COVID inquiry.
Yeah.
That was all fixated on WhatsApps and the sending. And we talked about how this was a new age of transparency where politicians probably couldn't assume that anything they put on WhatsApp about their own decision-making was likely to be kept private. So I think there is an issue here where I can't quite imagine what Andrew Gwynne was thinking in circulating, because this isn't a private. My understanding is that this wasn't a strictly private friends-only WhatsApp group. This was had quite a wide remit, and it was professional. It was connected to his business as an MP.
Yeah.
So this isn't just him circulating gags with some friends. I do think what an extraordinary error of judgment, and it almost beggars belief that he would write these things on a group that contains political affiliates and is arguably connected to his public role. Having said all of that, I do think there is something about WhatsApp which makes people tell awful jokes. Because it's sort of like, it feels unaccountable. It feels very casual. It feels very offhand. And you do forget that the people that you are sending them to, not speaking directly from personal experience.
To be clear.
Although, I wouldn't want my best friends' WhatsApp groups to be leaked to the public because, you do say things in that context which you presume are shielded from public scrutiny. But that's because you're doing it with friends in a context which you do assume is protected. If any of my friends are listening, you know who you are. So I think there is this difficult gap with Andrew Gwynne where, this was an arguably a more public forum than he should have been engaging with in this way. It does speak to a massive error of judgment. But I'd also think that, Tom, what the points that Tom made about the kind of nature of WhatsApp and the kind of dialogue it encourages does not necessarily belie his underlying discrimination against anyone. It's more WhatsApp brings this out of people, I think.
Definitely. And before we finish, I want to talk about the very public thoughts of Gwynne's replacement. Ashley Dalton, the new Minister for Public Health. She is a bit of a trans activist, I think it's fair to say. She was tweeting, these go way back to 2016, her tweets about this, but someone asked her, what should we do if someone identifies as a llama? Should we take them seriously? How seriously should we take that? And she said, yes, we should take it seriously. And those people should be treated with respect and dignity. Tom, what do you make of that? She's fallen so far down the trans rabbit hole. She cannot see a problem with even identifying across species.
That it really does take the biscuit, doesn't it? It makes you think that they're just not helping their own cause whatsoever. If you were a kind of committed gender ideology person, you'd think from day one, don't get drawn on the can you identify as a llama, cat, barn, whatever it might be.
Attack helicopter.
And yet they find themselves doing this time and again. Labour MPs of particular form. On top of the llama comment, obviously we have Dawn Butler, who famously said on television, I believe, that even babies aren't born with biological sex. We've had David Lammy not that long ago thinking out loud on LBC and coming to the conclusion that under the right medical conditions, a biological male can develop and kind of grow a cervix. In a sense, I don't think this is because they're being indoctrinated and being schooled in the ins and outs of gender ideology. They're kind of just having to make it up on the hoof.
Yeah.
They've convinced themselves that they have to be kind of on the side of the supposedly liberatory approach to one's identity and so on. And so you throw any question at them and they just have to go with it. Whether or not they realise what they're saying is ridiculous or not. I think it speaks, if anything, to actually not so much that these people are committed trans activists per se, but how unthinking the embrace of this line of thinking has been amongst a lot of Labour MPs, members of the great and good, to the point where they can get caught out on what are obviously ridiculous questions. In this case, it was obviously a wind-up question in particular. They kind of forced themselves to take it to its logical endpoint.
Yeah.
But it's not even out of as I say, like a deep understanding and belief and study of the kind of yawning, absurd gender ideology literature. They've just kind of half thought about it and want to look like a nice person.
Yeah.
And so they end up saying ridiculous things.
Yeah, because I doubt Judith Butler would approve of identifying as an animal or approve of the comparison of identifying as an animal and identifying across genders. Luke, they just want to be kind, and if it would be unkind to suggest that it's a daft thing to do to want to identify as an animal.
Yeah, I think there's been some hysterical reaction to this tweet. This was sent in 2016, as Tom indicated, a kind of response to a goading question. So I think arguably you could read it as she's trying to be philosophically consistent. She's responding to what is obviously a ridiculous question. And I think over the past couple of days, we've seen these comments presented as though they're going to form part of her health policy, which is equally ridiculous. When she's not seriously suggesting any massive policy changes to accommodate llamas within the NHS, for example. I think that, but Tom's right. In a sense, these issues come up because the philosophical commitments that this position demands of people are often too far, a step too far. We can't have blind self-identification. There are biological realities underpinning a lot of these questions. My feeling is that some of the crazier ends of this debate are now coming to an end, and that people are recognising, largely thanks to a lot of the important work that gender-critical feminists have done, a lot of the people in the gender-critical space, we now have a better, we are more willing to draw those lines, I think, as a society than we once were.
Yeah.
So hopefully we won't be recognising blindly and accepting when people identify as llamas. I don't ever think that was really the issue. The issue was, can we accept biological reality as part of our discussion around gender? And hopefully as a society we've moved more towards the sensible side than the ridiculous one.
You do almost feel for Keir Starmer though, because of the weird moment that a lot of Labour MPs had with this issue, he'd probably struggle to fill that position with someone who hadn't said something crackers about this issue at one point or another.